Hi, welcome to week 6. Hopefully you're feeling good, still surviving, still feeling like you know what's going on. This week I think will be an entry back into some more familiar territory for a lot of you than perhaps the past few weeks have been. But again, I think I want you to remember to come at it with this whole new lens, because just because we're familiar with something and we feel like we're comfortable knowing how to do something doesn't mean that we do it correctly. So we're going to make sure that you know how to do searching for information correctly, okay? And that's what we're concentrating on this week. We're looking at searching the net for resources, figuring out what's appropriate, what's not, for use in research. This is really important because this is the beginning of any research project. It should be, at least. And I can remember being a graduate student sitting in a professor's office talking about the topic I was going to use for my paper for her class, and she said, well, tell me, why do you want to write your paper about that? And I said, well, because I've always wondered about it. And she said, you can't write a paper about something because you've wondered about it. And I remember being very shocked, like, well, why couldn't I? Now I understand exactly what she was talking about. It's because you have to go and look at the literature. I can't, just because I wondered about it doesn't mean that it hasn't already been asked and answered, or doesn't mean that it's a question that somebody posed at one time and people realized it really wasn't a very good question. I've also had students sitting in my office where I've had to be on the other side of it and give that same speech. You can't ask something just because you wonder about it. You have to go to the literature and see what others have said. And I can remember very vividly that professor telling me, you have to find somebody else who said that that's a question that you should ask. And I felt like that was very limiting. I couldn't believe it in my, idealistic way. Like, what is she talking about? Why can't I think for myself? And all those things that you might be thinking also as you hear this, or things that you've thought before. But I'm going to tell you that when we're doing research, it really does matter what other people have said. You can be original, but that originality needs to come from your critique of the way other people have done something. Figuring out where a gap might be in the literature, whether it be through a methodological issue with their research, or not looking at the literature in the correct way, or using unreliable or invalid instruments, or using a different population perhaps than someone else has used. That's where the originality comes in critically evaluating what someone else has done. You can certainly have an original question, but you need to go to the literature and find out what other people have done to investigate that first. That's your first place you go for any research project, is the literature. I wonder why obesity is so prevalent in the United States. Go to the literature. You can't just come up with a study based out of your own head, guess what I'm getting at. So this week you're learning about concentrating on how to find credible sources for your studies. In your literature reviews, I'll expect to see that you have credible resources. Not only do I want to see that you have articles published out of good journals, but I want to see that you know who the preeminent authors are, and the sort of movers and shakers in a content area are. So you need to have the right authors, as well as the right literature and the right journals, and all those things represented. So if you're going to become an expert in a content area, you need to make sure you know what those are. And you'll find that out. You'll see it. The same authors will keep popping up. But that's what we're going to be looking for. Credibility in who you've chosen. And then in your lit review, you talk about what they found, but you also offer sort of a critical analysis. You tell us why these articles, why these studies deserve credence, and where the limitations might have been that you plan to address. That's what you're sort of doing as you're preparing your reader, bringing them down to your research questions. So this week you're going to concentrate on how to find out, how to find credible sources. Remember that something from the internet doesn't necessarily mean it's credible. Anyone can post anything on the internet, and it doesn't mean that it's true or valid or reliable. So oftentimes you're not going to be allowed to use internet sites as sources for credible research. No Wikipedia, no things like that. The exceptions to that might be those .gov sites, the Census Bureau, Department of Labor, USDA, technical reports that come out of government agencies, census reports, things that might come out of the CDC, the World Health Organization. Some of these big giants that we know are doing research and funding research and collecting data that we might need to use. statistical type of things. And I don't mean statistics like ANOVAs. I mean statistics like demographics. How many people that hold a college degree live in a certain town. Those kinds of things you can get from the internet. But that's probably where it's going to stop. The rest of the information you get is going to need to come from peer-reviewed sources. Sometimes edited books will work, but again, you still have to be careful with that. But peer-reviewed articles and going for the top-tiered journals is also going to be kind of where you're going. So you're going to get used to using the database through our library. People often ask, well, what database do you use? There's lots of databases that you can use for the social sciences. And if you have an opportunity to be on campus at any time, I encourage you to go to the library in person, meet with one of the librarians, and have them help you kind of do a search, because they obviously know of lots of different ways to do searches and search terms and different databases that I don't even know about, because that's their trade. That's what they do. And they are extremely helpful. Our librarians here would be happy to assist you. So if you have an opportunity to get to campus, I encourage you to use that tool to your advantage. If you don't, you can contact the distance library. We have a distance librarian, one who specializes in working with distance learners. Contact that librarian for some help or some assistance. But definitely use those resources that you have available to you. Some of the database that I tend to favor, that I tend to use the most in my work, is PsycInfo. But that will change for you all depending on your topic of interest. I know some people like to use ERIC, but not everything in ERIC is peer-reviewed, so just going to give you a caution about that. But I want to just emphasize sort of how the internet, just web pages on an internet or articles on an internet or in a magazine or in a newspaper, are not necessarily sources that we consider to be scholarly. And you're going to be needing to stick with scholarly sources for this class for research purposes. And so there's that for you. Another thing to keep in mind is that you want to always make sure that you go to the original source. You don't want to take someone else's word for it. I might read an article and come to you and tell you my interpretation of those findings. I might have read it wrong. I might not have known what I was talking about. I might not understand the statistical analysis they used, and so I tell you it's not worthwhile because I don't know what that is. I've never heard of it. Well, maybe it's the new cutting-edge analysis, and I haven't been keeping up in the literature well enough to know that. And so you've just taken my word for something, and I'm not qualified to do so. So remember that. You need to always go to the original source. A good example of this, I was teaching theory building one semester, and we were reading a book chapter where somebody had sort of compiled information from a lot of different authors, and we're talking about it. And the weekly discussion leader for that session had, I don't know why, she was just a very diligent student, had gone and looked up the original source. That there was a quote. Let me go back. There was a quote in a chapter that a big philosopher had given, and so she was just very interested in reading that person's work. She just wanted to learn more, and so she went on her own to that original source to read that person's works. She was just interested in learning more, and when she did, she said, "Ooh, this is weird because this quote in this chapter doesn't match exactly what he wrote. I mean, it's the same, everything's quoted correctly up to that point, but what he says right after that changes the whole meaning of everything." And she read it to us, and we thought, well, that does change the meaning. And so it's very important that you go to the original source to get information. So if so-and-so and such cited a statistic about population, you need to go to who they cited and read that original work. So you're going to spend a lot of time finding more sources. So it's not enough to just do a literature search, get like 10 articles and decide that that's all you're going to read. Because you need to read those 10 articles, and then you need to read the articles that those 10 articles cite if you're going to use any of that information, and on and on and on and on and on. So those are the main things I wanted you to get out of this week. Is scholarly sources don't necessarily include the internet, with some very few exceptions. And that you need to always be going to the original source, not relying on secondary sources. And I think that's what I wanted to make sure you got out of this week. definitely go and participate in all of the different opportunities available for you. And of course, there's the quiz and all those kinds of things. If you have any questions at all, get on the boards, let us know. We're here to help. Okay, good luck.